Good evening, and welcome to America's Open Wound, The Killing of the Movement, a planned 7-episode discussion and exploration of various topics related to race in America. Tonight, I have the privilege of introducing Episode 2, a dynamic presentation and discussion analyzing and offering solutions for addressing the wealth gap in this country. In a moment, we will begin with a video and audio montage with words from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in 1967, expressing frustration with the unequal economic footing in this country. That will set the tone for the engaging discussion of our panelists. Tonight's stellar cast of panel members to discuss these issues are South Carolina Congressman James E. Clyburn, the Majority Whip and the third-ranking Democrat in the United States House of Representatives. Congressman Clyburn provides a behind-the-scenes perspective, as only he can, of pending and recently enacted legislation, and the specter of coordinated voter suppression initiatives in multiple states and their implications for combating the wealth gap. Kirk Schmoke, a former mayor of Baltimore, a former dean of Howard University Law School, and current president of Baltimore University, embraces public policy initiatives and cautions against just waiting for government policies to take root. He makes specific reference to self-help approaches like the turn of the century Tulsa's Black Wall Street as a complementary approach to closing the wealth gap. Dr. Beverly Scott, Vice Chair of President Biden's National Infrastructure Advisory Council and past chair of the American Public Transportation Association, makes a compelling case for the unpreparedness of America's workforce and why, from an infrastructure and transportation perspectives. Dr. Glenda Glover, president of Tennessee State University and the international president of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, presents a bold prescription and a change of course for historically Black colleges and universities and other institutions of higher learning to meet the growing jobs demand gap. And Dr. Henry Cisneros, a former US Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, currently vice chair and equity owner of a national municipal and corporate finance firm, and chair and co-chief investment officer of an infrastructure investment firm, brings a unique approach to the challenge of closing America's jobs demand gap and creating generational wealth, whether that's with retooling, education, or pursuit of building on the basics of home ownership. Now, our viewing audience. First, our video and audio montage of the issues presented, and then our moderator, Derrickson Lawrence, to lead our esteemed panelists in tonight's discussion of the wealth gap.
It is, for me, a distinct honor to be on a program with Representative James Clyburn. He, in my view, is a giant not only in politics, but he's a hero in the entire nation. His foresight and throughout the Democratic primary and making it very clear that he was acting with integrity when he endorsed Joe Biden for president was really an amazing and important point in American history. Without his actions, things in this country could be very different. I must say that some people might underestimate the importance of that act. I do not. And I believe most people who are involved with public policy and recognize turning points in American history will recognize the key role that James Clyburn has played in this country. So this is an important discussion that we're about to have, but for me, it is this is just a distinct honor for me to be able to say these things because they are true, they are important, and the importance of what Congressman Clyburn has done for this country will be magnified over the years as history looks back on it.
Well, thank you so much for those comments, Kirk. You know what I think about you, and your late mother meant so much to me. In fact, having her in South Carolina, right around the time I was beginning my quest to become a member of Congress, and she was so beneficial to my efforts. So you'll always have a special place for me, because she had a special place with me. And so I thank you so much for your kind words, and thank you for your service as mayor and as a tremendous educator.
Former U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Dr. Henry Cisneros.
Thank you for inviting me onto the program. Congratulations on organizing something that extends to your members the information to make better judgments about some of the policy issues of our day. It is an honor to be with Dr. Glenda Glover, a renowned president of a university and president of one of the best known aggregations of African-American leaders in the country, in AKA. And it's a special treat also to be with my dear friend, former Mayor Kurt Schmoke, who has held many positions of responsibility, including Dean of the Law School at Howard University. And one of my favorite pictures of Kurt of all time is as a running back for the Yale football team, carrying the ball around the end with that big Y on his helmet. He's a all-American man. He's a wonderful person. He's one of the people I admire most, along with Congressman Clyburn, who is a genuine hero to those of us who believe in the basic values of government, balance, fairness, rational judgments. He is just one of the most mature leaders for our times. And I mean that very sincerely. He's a genuine hero who's unafraid to speak up in practical terms for what works and what can be accomplished and bring both sides together.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this all-important session on wealth building and how we can close that wealth gap, which is a conversation that we continue to have. I think now we're about to embark upon an initiative, several initiatives that can make that happen. So I'm anxious for us to get started with this session.
It's absolutely a pleasure to be here and to be able to join everyone today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. Representative Clyburn, President Glover, President Schmoke, Secretary Cisneros, welcome. I'm Dirksen Lawrence, and it is indeed a high honor and privilege to engage you as national leaders in the areas of politics, education, transportation, and investment banking to tackle the issue of closing the wealth gap, but to also leave our audience with a framework of a solution and the path forward. To set the stage for this discussion is a montage. Take a listen. Where do we go from here?
But for this cycle, I went back and picked up Martin Luther King Jr.'s book, his last book.
Okay. What was the
Which
title?
was, where do we go from here?
Okay.
Chaos or community? You can't be more poignant, but you know, I'm beyond the promise. I ain't got a whole lot of time left. I got to do something. We got to do something quick.
at the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
You know, it can't just be about criminal justice reform. It also has to be about economic development and access to capital. My good friend, Senator Kamala Harris, and I, we talk often, and she talks about in communities where they have a robust economy, where you have jobs, where you have a good education system, where you have stable employment, you see less crime. And so what we have to do in marginalized minority communities is try to build up the infrastructure so people don't feel that they have to resort to crime, and they see hope. So when we fight for the Trayvon Martins of the world, but more importantly, Brother Lawrence, when we fight for the unknown Trayvon Martins of the world, when we fight for whom my grandmother called the least of these, as she references the Bible, to have an equal opportunity at the American dream, what we are really doing is helping America to live up to its creed. What we're really doing is helping America to be the great beacon of hope and justice for all the world to marvel. But most importantly, Brother Lawrence, what we are doing is helping America to be America for all Americans.
It's half loaf, if maybe 1/4 of a loaf. Just got off the phone a few hours ago with Senator Warnock talking about this. And it's a classic example of what King was talking about. Now, we passed the child tax credit. According to the experts, of the children living in poverty, the child tax credit will take half of them, lift half of them out of poverty. Nobody's focusing on the fact that it's temporary. It's only 1 year.
Okay.
But nobody's working externally, though I'm doing what the heck I can on inside with the Ways and Means Committee, trying to make it permanent. That's going to be a big number to make the child tax credit permanent. So if you don't make the child tax credit permanent, then how do you sustain lifting them out of poverty after 1 year? But guess what we have not done? We have not expanded Medicaid. 12 states, 9 of which are southern states. You got Senate races going on in North Carolina the next year. Val, you running for the Senate down in Florida. Warnock is trying to get reelected, if we don't expand Medicaid so that these poor and low-income people and middle-income people who've got to take care of their children, their senior citizens, their parents and grandparents, that's what Medicaid is all about. Everybody thinks Medicaid is only about poor people. Medicaid is about senior citizen care. When I was in Tulsa, the thing that bothers me most about Tulsa today, I don't know if you've been there recently, but right down the middle of Greenwood, there's a big 4-lane highway, making permanent the decimation of that district, making it permanent. And you can go all over. And we're going to do something about that this time. We've got in this new bill in the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee dealing with that issue, because we have determined that they're using highway monies to separate the Black communities, to render them almost useless.
We've all had that experience, or at least I've heard the phrase growing up on the other side of the tracks.
Oh, yeah.
Talk to me about the significance of Congressman's comments.
The congressman is absolutely spot on. Okay, we have had, you can just close your eyes and community after community, Atlanta, Cleveland, Nashville, that, I mean, really much of the reason I do the work I do is because I experienced, I've lived this my entire life. So yes, racial divides, it continues even today in terms of displacements and gentrification and displacements without really thinking through broader policies in terms of inclusionary zoning and stuff. So to just put the accent on it, yes, the leader is absolutely correct in terms of what has been the ravage, if you will, of infrastructure investments that have not been properly guided nor equity centered.
So infrastructure and transportation is the name of that bill making its way through Congress. That doesn't sound sexy to me, right? But it's been called another name, and to shorten it, I would say a jobs bill. If you say jobs bill, now that's, that gets my attention. So let me preface this discussion with the idea that we need to close the jobs demand gap as a predicate to closing the wealth gap. So the last 6 months, industries are coming back. They're coming roaring after COVID-19, but the bottom 50% of our economy is not participating. Some of the false narratives that you hear is they're on stimulus dollars or unemployment. But for you as a workforce development professional and in the space of infrastructure and transportation, my question is twofold. One, what do you tell that young man or woman or middle-aged person for that matter, who's hearing about government earmarking billions of dollars in this bill, some of which to invest in new modes of transportation, particularly electric vehicles and supply chain? It's just one example. They don't have job skills. How do they get a foot in the door? What do you tell them? Where do they start? They're in New York, they're in Philly, Maryland. What do they do?
Well, you know what? The first thing I tell them is that they need to care, is that we need to care about infrastructure, okay? Because infrastructure literally shapes your life. Because we're talking about transportation, we're talking about energy, we're talking about water, we're talking about communications. So that's number one. And infrastructure does in fact have the ability, properly used, to wind up economic, environmental, social. So yes, we need to care, okay? So what I say is this, is that there's no like magic panacea, but the first thing that I would say is let's do some homework here, okay? In terms of the kinds of jobs there are all kinds of jobs that are in the infrastructure areas. And so I want to be clear about that. But the bulk of the positions are actually frontline positions. They are wonderful, skilled and semi-skilled positions. And these are the positions that are not the ones that designed it and not the ones who were the engineers of it, but the long-term operations and maintenance. Those are the jobs that for all practical purposes, and we basically gutted what we used to call old vocational education, or when we made that big shift from manufacturing to a service economy. And those are really the jobs that we lost, and that's really what we lost. Let me be very clear. If we put not one more dime in, we have 3 million projected vacancies that are going to take place across the infrastructure sectors in the next 10 years, and those will come from retirements. We have infrastructure sector folk right now, sectors that have vacancies. They cannot hire because and I'm not talking about the pandemic and whether people want to come back, because they have not systemically not been able to hire them because they have not been able to find the people who were job ready.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. If I heard you correctly, there are 3 issues here. Number one, we're already running at a deficit of 3 million over the next decade owing to attrition. Number 2, with the infrastructure and transportation bill, that's going to spur an additional 3 million over the same time horizon. And number 3, with the Build Back Better plan, according to Moody's, those numbers are going to jump 2 million per year over the next decade. So that's another 20 million. When you look at those numbers, Dr. Glover and Secretary Cisneros, that's a tall order in terms of the jobs demand gap. What needs to be done?
Well, thank you. And I'm honored to be on this panel with such distinguished individuals. And I'm so pleased that you're having this segment. But you're right, it's about jobs. Infrastructure bill, if we can just put the name on it, it's about jobs and job readiness. We're going to have 6 million jobs open immediately. And then over the next years, that's going to grow and grow. So the question is, how do we fill those jobs? How can higher education help? How will HBCUs help? People pursuing 4-year degrees. And that's not necessarily the persons we're totally looking for. But all these jobs are not jobs that's going to be for the 4-year degrees and the master's degree people and the PhDs, because it's going to be the skilled labor jobs. So institutions have to step up to the plate, start offering certificate programs, all the training that we're going to need, more and more popular. That's going to become more and more popular in short term. We will need, is there an appetite for Tennessee State University, other institutions, to be able to offer types of programs that are short term in nature to prepare for these type of jobs that's going to come open. If the job market jumps from 6 million to 26 million in that period of time, that could be the birth of a new renaissance for Black businesses. Something we've not seen since Reconstruction, as the most since FDR's New Deal. So we have to create these small businesses, Black and investing in Black-owned businesses. So we're looking at, even at Tennessee State, we're looking at certificate programs to assist in various types of industries, because it's not enough to depend on simply the old way we're doing things, of just educating students to get master's degrees and doctorate degrees, although we love doing that because that helps us in our funding formula and helps us as we participate in America. But for this particular infrastructure bill, we're going to need a bit more than that. We're going to need a certain skill set. We'll need people who, with the soft skills, the persons who are able to leverage their political capital, elect people who are interested in investing in our infrastructure, the roads, the IT, the streets, the buildings. And so how do we get to create the construction programs? There's not a single Black heavy equipment business in the country. So we need to look at the skill set and see how we can go from where we are now to where we need to be. And, like how to operate a drone, the blueprint design. There are so many businesses going to be born out of this infrastructure act that we have. This infrastructure bill is going to be so tremendous, so that we got to make sure the African-American community will not get left out of it, and we can't educate ourselves out of it. So that's why we have to circle back and look at certificate programs and how can we help anyone and everyone to become a part of this new economic deal.
Secretary, it sounds like Dr. Glover agrees with you.
Well, let me say it is I who agree with Dr. Glover, because her diagnosis and her analysis is precisely correct. And it's wonderful to see her as the president of an institution speak with such passion and such clarity about such an important subject, because it has to make a difference as her faculty hears that, as her students hear that, as the public hears that. And we put our higher education presidents in a position where they're much more than just institutional leaders. They're voices of conscience. And Dr. Glover, I commend you on
Thank you.
on your playing your role that way. But what I agree with Dr. Glover most about is when she said we're going to need more than that, more than just hoping that the jobs take hold and that they're available to people who have been marginalized. We're going to have to work in explicit ways to intervene to make the economy work. It's one thing to create the jobs, and we're going to have an explosion of new jobs because the technology is changing, points of inflection with respect to new forms of technology being applied in many, many ways. The infrastructure is changing. So what used to be just fossil fuel generating plants is now solar and wind. And what used to be just traditional water systems now is water quality and conservation programs. What used to be just building more roadways is now sensors embedded in the roadways to manage traffic, as well as other applications of technology. We're in a new place, and lots of jobs are going to be created because we're not going to do just more of the same. So the question is, how do we prepare people for those jobs? It's right to have a national pre-K, universal pre-K. It's right to put more money into K through 12 education. It is absolutely right to insist on funding available for community colleges. So young people who may not be able to go to a four-year institution immediately can get that interim step into community college. And it's right to invest in our higher education systems, not just traditional higher education, but using broadband to extend it into rural areas and so forth to reach, and urban areas to reach poor populations. And then there's one additional step we need to take, and that is we need to make sure that even when people have an education, they get the chances to get the jobs afterwards. I saw an analysis the other day that said, although 10% of the computer science degrees in America are given to African Americans, 10%, only 2% of the jobs in the computer field, 2% of the jobs in Silicon Valley go to African Americans. So we have to make sure that at that critical moment when we separate who's going to get the good jobs, who's going to get the good paying jobs, and who is funneled in a different direction, that people of color, African Americans, Latinos, and others have the opportunity to access the jobs that are going to create incomes and prosperity for the long run. There's two issues here. One of them is incomes. That's very important. But the other is the creation of ownership, the creation of wealth, the creation of net worth. Income is what you get in your monthly check, in your biweekly check, and you make ends meet. But net worth is what you're able to show in terms of eventual wealth because you own a home, or you have stocks, or you buy property, or you create a business. And America is driven by the accumulation of net worth. Now, for most African Americans and Latinos, the income gap is substantial. It's only they make only about 70% of what the average white worker makes. That's very bad. But the wealth gap is ridiculously wide. African Americans and Latinos own on average about 10% of the assets of the average white family. They don't have a good pension system. They don't have a good retirement system. They don't have the ability to save money in order to invest in the purchase of a home. The home ownership rate, there's a 30-point gap on home ownership rate. The white home ownership rate is 70%. The African American and Latino rate is in the low 40s. So there's where we have a big problem that makes permanent the opportunity gap in our society. All of these things require explicit action and thought. And we have to focus on that.
Well, let me pick up on the comment that Representative Clyburn made that I think people may miss the significance of when he talked about Tulsa. The significance of Tulsa is not only, of course, in dealing with the horror that occurred of the race riot, but it's what happened before, because it addresses what you're talking about the wealth gap. What they did in Tulsa is not wait for federal policy or state government policy. They did things internally in the Black community to cycle money within the community. Now, clearly there was a very oppressive segregation era, but they recognized that if they kept the money in the community, that they could indeed improve the quality of life for African Americans, and they did. They did a dramatic job, and that's a lesson that I think we have to learn. So we can't just wait for federal policy, and I will address some policies that could occur. But if we communicate, as Representative was saying, in a complementary fashion and learn the lessons from places like Tulsa pre-1920, then I think we can start to see significant improvements in closing the wealth gap and improving the quality of life in our communities.
So President Smoak is talking about self-help, which actually translates to entrepreneurship and leads to home ownership and other investments. You've already differentiated between income and wealth. Talk to us a little bit more about those building blocks of wealth, i.e. the acquisition of other asset classes, which is one of the true keys of generational wealth. Yes?
Well, Dirksen, first of all, let me compliment you again on even raising these very difficult but important questions in a framework for your membership where people can begin to think about it. Because action by leaders, non-governmental leaders, is a very important part of the equation. And your fraternity, as well as Dr. Glover's sorority, have always been a major force in the African American community in our country, and can continue to be. I, during my time at HUD, encountered a group called 100 Black Men that operated when I first saw them in Kansas City. And I was just thoroughly impressed. I've tried to replicate that in the Latino community in the years since, because it's leaders coming together using their clout. Not everybody needs to be a U.S. senator or a governor or a mayor or a president of a university. There's a lot of people who just go about being leaders in their community, and we're going to need that kind of engagement. Now, to your question, I do believe that America runs on ownership as a building block for wealth. For most Americans, the sum total of their net worth is the equity that they have in their home. Everything else is borrowed. That money that they are putting away, building their equity so that eventually they own their home. Yes, they're going to own the four walls and have a place to live. But it's also money that they can use to borrow upon to send a child to college, to borrow upon to start a business, to borrow upon to buy another rent property and begin to get some wealth in multiple properties. This is the way the country works. And to the extent that today, African Americans and people of color are denied the disposable income to save and to have net worth, that gap is going to remain as wide as it is. It is unthinkable in the United States that we would have an income gap as wide as it is, but unconscionable that we have a wealth gap of the degree that it is. It makes a huge difference in terms of creating opportunity for the next generation. I'm a big believer in small business because I love the independent spirit of small business people. And I love the kind of leadership that comes out of small business. But what I really love about creating a small business is that it gives people the opportunity to pass on wealth to the next generation. When I see Washington and Sons Construction Company or Gonzalez and Sons Masonry Company, I know that the next generation is building something that is going to last a long time, and great things are going to come from that. There's going to be our share of big businesses that come from that. So it is a multi-generational effort. It is about raising income so people have some disposable income and some savings. It's about improving pension systems and retirement systems. It's about setting up 401ks, and it's about educational improvements so people get a better start with a better job and put them on a better career track. All of those elements are elements that we need to work on. Let me close by saying it's not enough just to wish for an infrastructure package from the federal government, because we've had that before. What's important is that we engage the leadership spirit that now exists at the city, county, and neighborhood level in public officials at the local level to do smart things with that money. And then it's important that we have nonprofits and community organizing that's holding people accountable for the use of that money. We can't just have another allocation of federal money that's wasted. We have to use it for purposes of creating economic mobility. And finally, when we have entrepreneurs and owners, the public sector recognizes their leadership. That's where leadership at the local community comes from, for the church, for the Little League, for the community-based organizations, for the CDCs, for the local city council, for the school board. So I'm a believer in how these things come together. I've just seen it too many times, hundreds and hundreds of times across America. And even though some of us may be tired and some of us may be disappointed and frustrated with what we've seen in recent years and the seeming lack of progress, we can never quit.
Well, first, let me agree with the Secretary. It's not about income, it's equity. I mean, we have to preach that to everyone. It's not about income, it's equity, it's net worth. And when you talk about to our population, our biggest asset is a house. You know, we don't have a balance sheet that says investment in XYZ company. That's not on our balance sheets. Our biggest asset in the African-American community is our home. And so we have to find a way to leverage what we have to get this entrepreneurship reconstruction model together. We look at 96% of Black-owned businesses are sole proprietorships owned by a single individual. 96% of the businesses that are owned, compared to 79% of white businesses. And over half of those are personal services. So this is an opportunity for us to really dissect what's happening in transportation, infrastructure. And because Black businesses don't lack quality or know-how, they lack investment. So there has to be investment opportunities. And it's not so much what the bank is going to do, because you can have capital that's both debt and equity capital. So a bank would gladly lend you $30,000 to buy a car, but won't lend you that same $30,000 to go into business. I see this as a time of entrepreneurship. It's a major model we have to develop now, an economic reconstruction model to have a full-scale Black-owned businesses. How can college universities help? How can nonprofits help? How can Omega Psi Phi Alpha help? The business development centers, incubation centers, women being engaged, the professional organizations being engaged. So we have to show that we're going to work together to bring about a new era in entrepreneurship, to show how we're going to go to our uncles, our sisters, our brothers, our church members, to get capital, to go into business, get started with something, because it's not going to work. But if we're going with the big firms to say, let's go here and help do this, now here's a chance to get more Black-owned businesses set up. There are some problems we'll work through. We'll work through the bonding and insurance, but this is the opportunity that we can't let this harvest pass. And so we have to take out a second person on the home to get started. Shift the debt to equity in yourself and go into business. This is the time of entrepreneurship now. That's what HBCUs are teaching. That's what colleges have to teach in the business schools. They must step up to the plate now and teach how the entrepreneurship model has to be developed. And right now, this is where we are now. It's not what happened last year, not to be criticizing what happened in the last 4 years. It's what we're doing now, where we are now. This is a time for us to make a difference because we can.
No, I just wanted to say amen. Dr. Glover is precisely on point.
Here's a name I'm sure you remember, Jack Kemp
Sure.
and Henry Cisneros. They pursued economic empowerment zones in the 80s. We saw different versions of that in the 90s. And the idea behind it was to revitalize blighted communities.
I can speak to that because I was mayor when both Henry Cisneros and Jack Kemp were HUD secretaries. And their ideas for empowerment zone were slightly different.
Okay.
And it related particularly to public housing, improvement of public housing. But what Jack Kemp wanted to do was to give kind of modest subsidies to communities. And with respect to public housing, he wanted us to turn them into condos or offer them as condos without giving the kind of money that was necessary to really improve the physical condition of those buildings, most of which had been built right after World War II to deal with families of returning GIs. What we learned there was that if you were going to do that kind of empowerment zone effort, the subsidy really had to be deep in order to persuade a business to locate in the heart of a city rather than out in the suburbs, where it was easy transportation, free parking, things of that nature. So Cisneros came in and said, look, it was through the Hope 6 program in particular as it relates to public housing. We're going to give you, we'll take the regulations off the money, same money, not a lot of new money, but giving you the authority to be more creative on how you're going to use that money. And so we were able to go to community groups, listen to them, get their ideas, also go to businesses to say, hey, you've got an investment opportunity with some complementary money from the federal government, and let's see if we can work together. Now for Baltimore, it ended up that we were able to use that empowerment zone money to actually stimulate a lot of business activity and a new job creation. And we were able to use that same philosophy through the Hope 6 program to tear down rotting public housing, rebuild nice neighborhoods with a mix of home ownership and rental and senior citizen housing. And so it did have an impact, but that was just, one section of town. We got it through the empowerment zone effort, Congressman. We got $100 million, but we had billions of dollars of problems. So we were thankful for what we got. But clearly, if a program is going to be successful, it has to have a deep enough subsidy so it's attractive to the private sector to work with the public sector in making improvements. And whether something like that could be passed now, it's hard to say. I'd have to defer to the congressman on that.
Well, something like that is going to pass either this year or next. We're going to visit using Jack Kemp's concept, not just, if you remember, Bill Clinton came along with empowerment zones and enterprise communities.
Right.
And we are looking at that and seeing how we can get those concepts into opportunity zones. Now, Tim Scott, I'm not going to, he's my senator, and he's the big proponent of opportunity zones. So I'm not going to change the name of it, but I'm going to gut it.
Right.
It's going to have some new intestines.
Kurt is right in his comments that we worked very hard to create two dynamics in Baltimore. One of them was, I'm proud to say, the elimination of that kind of unlivable public housing. There were 4 big developments in Baltimore. Lafayette was one of them. All 4 were about the same size. They no longer exist. We literally took them down, imploded them, and replaced them with more livable scale, decent living conditions, what we call a defensible space, where people could feel that they were going into a private apartment, not going into a building where they were going to be frisked by drug gangs. It's made a huge difference in transforming neighborhoods of central Baltimore. The other initiative was called the Empowerment Zones, and it more relates to your theme in this program, which is raising incomes, creating ownership, addressing the income gap, and creating a sense of economic mobility. And those were programs that looked at neighborhoods that had the raw potential to be revitalized if we could attract economic investment through a series of tax incentives, governmental assistance, incentives to investment. And the one in Baltimore was built in East Baltimore based on the economic engine of Johns Hopkins University and Johns Hopkins Hospital, the great medical center, one of the greatest medical centers and medical schools in the world. And the idea was to utilize the contracting power, the economic clout of Johns Hopkins, to let it not just be a fortress isolated from the community, but an integrated part of the community where income could be shared, jobs could be created, wages could be raised, training could occur. And I think we were able to make some progress. It remains a good idea and remains something that should be pursued as national policy even today.
Okay. In 2021, do you see or do you have any adjustment ideas for the type of policies that were implemented back at the time that Dean Kurt Schmirk and you walked the streets?
I believe that what we're facing at the moment may be the greatest opportunity since Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, or maybe that moment in the sun with Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society, because the pandemic and the attendant economic problems have created the political opportunity to pass not only pandemic relief, but the American Rescue Act. Following on that will be the American Jobs Act, the big infrastructure program of almost $1 trillion. And following that, some very basic new programs that deal with things like childcare and universal pre-K and community college tuition assistance for a total of several $1 trillion. The American people understand we need something different to combat the multiple scourges we have confronted: the pandemic, the economic turn down, the obvious lack of economic mobility, which has kept portions of our national population marginalized. And so we have a moment to really make some things work. Those dollars allocated with flexibility to cities across America, where there is immense initiative, immense innovation occurring, young people wanting to make a difference in their neighborhoods, entrepreneurial mayors like Mayor Schmoke was, and many other dynamics at work that we can unleash by bringing imaginative ideas and resources. I think we're on the edge of potentially a golden moment for the infrastructure of our cities, for the investment in community entrepreneurship, for quality of life in neighborhoods. This could be a really, really important time. So I'm very optimistic about this moment if we seize it correctly and use some smart initiative.
One of the policies that benefited our community and could have done a lot more was when Congress passed the Community Reinvestment Act to make sure that banks set aside a certain amount of their money to invest in neighborhood organizations. Now, some banks were far more involved than others, but with a strengthened Community Reinvestment Act with real monitoring to make sure that money does flow into the community, into small businesses, into people of color. That's a policy that I think would help a great deal. But I would not, I don't want to underestimate the fact that we have a lot that we can do within our own community to help address this matter.
You know, I understand the concept of the urban Wall Street and the idea of trying to get that going. But wouldn't you think that Community Reinvestment Act today isn't being leveraged as much as it should, primarily because it took some real hits after 2007, 2008,
right?
Primarily because people said, well, that was we lowered credit standards, and because of that, that led to the meltdown. So how do we bring that back? How do we modernize that act?
You're giving the roadmap towards what needs to be done. We shouldn't give up, on it, but it has to be modernized. And I'm just saying that, again, now I'm somebody who was an elected official. My students remind me I was an elected official back in the last century. The congressman, of course, is more up to date on these things. But at least in the 80s and 90s, it was starting to show promise. It just wasn't enforced enough. And so if there's an enforcement mechanism to say that the banks do have a responsibility of setting aside a certain amount of money for community reinvestment, I do think that complemented with other things that are going on in the private sector would have an impact. The one thing that your chart reminds me of, though, in terms of wealth gap, is that group at the top 1% also exercises incredible political power, and that has their political influence because of that money, because of that wealth, sometimes goes against what you see in the bottom 50% of that chart. And so the wealth and politics do come together as an issue that will influence public policy.
Well, I have always maintained throughout my adult life the admonition that we got from George Santayana when he wrote, "If we fail to learn the lessons of history, we're bound to repeat them." When I spoke out about how we need to deal with half loaf versus no loaf versus the whole loaf. When the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964, it didn't have voting, it didn't have housing, and it did not have the public sector. We outlawed discrimination in the private sector only. We came back in 65 and got voted. We came back in 68 and got housing. We came back in 72 and made it apply to the public sector. Now, everybody talk about it today as if it was one fell swoop. It was not. I don't think you're going to believe this.
Okay, try me.
True. Interesting story in the New York Times this morning about the infiltration of these movements that took place last year. If you have not read it, because I'm having it printed out to share with everybody in the caucus, look at the front page of the New York Times this morning, and it carries over into a full 2-page spread on the stuff that took place last year, infiltrating our political process. And that is what is happening all across the board. We can't get anything like the Community Reinvestment Act passed today. You can't do it. You know, if we got to have some massive realignment politically next year, or I can tell you, King said in his speech about 40 acres in a mule, we never got the land. A lot of people still think, and I've heard people argue that we squandered the 40 acres of the mule. They don't know that Congress rescinded the 40 acres of the mule. The 40 acres of the mule never got done.
Right.
You know, and you go right down through history, there are a lot of things that people just don't realize just never got done.
Found in our community is that we have to educate people about voting all the time and not just in the presidential year, because you know what has happened. There's this strategy by the Republicans and particularly this group called ALEC that worked with them on a long-range strategy. I mean, they've been figuring this out 10, 15 years ago about how to take over the state legislative districts, because it's there that all the maps get drawn for the congressional districts. And so if you've got control of, you know, these state legislators districts, that's going to have an impact in Congress and the ability to pass the type of legislation that the congressman is talking about.
The Lone Star State is gaining 2 congressional seats thanks to population growth, largely fueled by communities of color. But they may not be the ones benefiting from the redistricting fight currently underway. Covering this is our political reporter, Daniel Bush. He is in Houston. Dan, right off the top, tell us exactly how this redistricting very hot fight is playing out.
Well, Lisa, Republicans are driving the bus here. That's because they control the state legislatures. Democrats are looking at this process sort of from the outside looking in. They're the party out of power. They don't have a lot of control, but they do feel that they're responsible for this growth, and they do want more political representation. Here is Fort Bend County Judge KP George, the executive of the county.
My county is benefiting from people like me, but when it comes to the seat at the table, we don't have it.
So that's an education matter, and for me, when I talk education, I'm just not talking about particular institutions, you know, K through 12, community college, 4-year. I'm talking about lifelong learning, and lifelong learning includes not only the issues that substantive issues that we talk about in the classroom, but civic engagement that will lead people to recognize that when they say it's time to vote, you vote, whether it's local, state, national elections. That's how we turn things around in a more favorable manner.
I hear what you just said, and it's music to my ears. What's actually needed is effort towards driving towards that on a very small proof of concept phase, so that we can say, there it is, the resources came together, and here was the results of that. and this is how to get it done. I would pose that question to you and hear how you respond.
I'd be happy to begin. I would say there's proof of concept in many different ways and places. You can take, for example, proof of concept in a city. Let's say the city of Atlanta, where Mayor Hasim Reed, the previous mayor, inaugurated a concept that focused on equity office in the mayor's office to look at city decisions through an equity lens. Atlanta has become one of the most vibrant cities in the country, in part because the African-American middle class has grown so substantial. In fact, people are now coming back to Atlanta whose family had left the South to live in the North and coming back because it is a place to be, a place where opportunity is sprouting. And African-American leaders like Mayor Maynard Jackson, for whom the airport is in part named, because he opened up contracting opportunities for African Americans in Atlanta Hartsfield Airport, in Jackson Airport, and many other fields. Mayor Maynard Young, when he was mayor of Atlanta. So I'm picking just one proof of concept, a city that has made intentional economic mobility strategies a reality.
Now add to that, I'm happy to hear, as you mentioned, the airport, Mr. Secretary, because I think that got everybody excited years ago. We saw that that's the model.
Yeah.
When Mayor Maynard Jackson just insisted, we're going to do anything else, we're going to shut it down so we can get more. But we took the model to Jackson, Mississippi, when I was there, and Harvey Johnson became the mayor, and we needed everything. Overnight, it turned to a Black structure, a Black mayor. Now I became chair of the airport board, and I did it exactly the way Maynard Jackson did. So I was so excited to have been under his
Yeah.
But then look at the Black CPAs. We've had to put together the National Association of Minority CPA Firms, MNCAP. So we went out to say, listen, if you really are serious about this, why don't you use Black CPAs? You don't have to call a non-minority every time you want to get a financial statement certified. So even the Black CPA firms got there and said, use us. We can help certify it. The Black lawyers, I'm not smith with the Black lawyers. I do know we did that for the Black suppliers. Then those that sit on corporate boards, start from the top. I sit on a bank board, Pinnacle Bank board, and we are very deliberate in making sure we got minority contractors, minority suppliers. You're going to deal with any look at your diversity roles. If you, for those who are fortunate enough to, Black women, Blacks in general, don't normally sit on corporate boards. But at that top level, make sure companies understand that role and how you have to use Black contractors and suppliers. So you get it. There's so many proof of concept models that we incorporate and make sure we use what we have. Cash your bucket where you are. Use what you have now and make those models work. Enhance those, because we have some workable models. We have some proofs of concepts. So let's get what we have now and go from the models that we have and make them work better.
And I'll just give you another example. Kathy Hughes, who has a communications empire with Radio One and many of. One of the things that she does is that from time to time she will set aside a certain amount of time on a radio show to identify the African-American owned businesses in the particular community where her radio stations have an impact, and urge people to support those communities. If every major African-American business did that, you could see that money cycling and lifting a lot of boats in our community. And that's just one example. There are many others.
And that's where we're headed. Even the Divine Nine, we look at what the concept that the Divine Nine have created, your own fraternity, Makers High Five, the things that they have brought to the table, the concepts of how to grow entrepreneurs. That's where we are now. We're all looking collectively, the HBCU community, the HBCU presidents, the National Council of Negro Women. Let's talk to Dr. John L. Cole today. We're looking at how is it we can grow this entrepreneurial concept at this particular moment. We're not, stop talking about the poverty level. How can we grow more entrepreneurs? What's the incubation center? What is that concept looking like now? How can we get more from this very bill where we need some skilled labor? What is the model for the skilled labor concept? Yes, we're going to have a lot of people in management and those telling others what to do, but we need folks who are going to get their hands dirty and work. So where is that concept of skilled labor? So we're all getting together. These are things that are on the agenda now that we're discussing at the president's level. What is our role? And how can we enhance that and push that forward? Push that through these next 3.5 years, because that's where we are. That's where we have to go on now.
And Derrickson, just to add to the president's comments, I have an affiliation and working with a group of colleagues in the firm Siebert Williams Shank, which is attempting to do pioneering work in the finance field, generally American finance. If you did a snapshot picture of the financial sector in the United States, you would find one of the least inclusive sectors in American life, and yet one of the most important, because so many decisions in our country revolve around finance. I'm proud to be associated with a firm that really walks the talk in hiring, in training, in mentoring, in summer interns, and there are others like this one. In the Latino, there's the New America Alliance, is an alliance of largely financial firms making progress. You ask for proof of concept, there it is, emerging before our eyes. Just to link some of this conversation, Siebert Williams Shank is number 3 in the country, up there with the likes of JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank in funding airport transactions. Number 5 in the country in funding water transactions. So the proof of concept is there. We just need to just not give up, not get tired, and press on.
Well, I tell you, I thought I almost heard an urban Wall Street scenario here in what you were putting forward. And we really are being grateful to have this panel. It seems like we're just getting started, as I saw the banter going back and forth, but we've come up to the end of the hour that we committed to, and I don't want to run foul of that. So I'm going to pause here and say that our audience, I think, have been treated with some real insights into not only conceptually how we close the wealth gap, but actually having a semblance of a roadmap to getting there. And I want to thank you for joining this esteemed guest of panel members. We hope to be able to reach out to you in the future as we do other segments in America's Open Wound.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm honored to be part of it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Senator.
Well, thank you very much.
Great being on the panel and listening to all these points of view. But I just have to once again emphasize Congressman Clyburn is our hero. He's a national hero, and everybody ought to recognize that, reflect upon it, and thank him every day for the work that he's done in the past and will do in the future. We really appreciate it.
I second that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for participating. Good night.
I'm Nelson Adams. I'm a practicing physician now for 42 years, and I've seen a few things. Suffice it to say, it's been said that the more things change, the more they stay the same. After hearing these comments tonight, this discussion tonight, this interfacing of subject matter experts tonight, I recognize that they don't have to stay the same, but we've got work to do. Please join me, folks, in saying a huge thank you to our panel members, our storytellers, if you will. And I certainly would be remiss if I didn't give a huge thank you to our moderator tonight, Derrickson K. Lawrence, for an outstanding job. Job well done, sir. We certainly appreciate that. You know, and the candor, the forthrightness, the provocative commentary has provided an unequivocal answer, I might say, to a question that was posed in the title of Martin Luther King Jr.'s last book. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? I think it's extremely clear to us that it's all community. And community simply means we, not just some of us, but all of us. The collective we the people. It goes without saying that January 6th shocked not just some of us, but all of us. We recognize that insurrection, as well as the ensuing political upheaval, are constant reminders that our democracy has been and will continue to be challenged and threatened. And so we have got to be involved. You've seen tonight the second episode of a 7-episode docuseries. The first was entitled Law and Order. Tonight, we're focused on closing the wealth gap. But in concert with the we, our next episode is going to be civic engagement. Yes, each of us, me, you, Lottie, Dottie, and everybody need to be involved. Civic engagement. Suffice it to say, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? Now is the time, and the time is always now. Let me encourage you to stay tuned. The next episode will be forthcoming, and we once again simply want to say thank you to our panel members, thank you to our moderator, and thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. Until next time, peace, blessings, and Godspeed. Good night.
And you've got it on the diagram, your whole cloth thinking about this, okay? It's absolutely spot on, okay?
Are you referring to the economic reconstruction model?
This world is changing.
So
You're
panel members,
amazing, Brother Derek. I mean, Brother Lawrence, you're amazing. Thank you so much.
It was, I think we got each other motivated and sort of picked up as we went.